Are you ready? Okay, well, I will open the regular meeting of the Legislative Performance Audit and Oversight Committee. And we've got a few things on the agenda this morning. The first is the acceptance of the April meeting minutes.
Move to approve as written and presented.
Second.
So moved by Senator Lang, seconded by Representative Griffin. Any changes needed? We don't need a roll call for this.
Voice vote.
Okay, voice vote. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, Mr. Henry, you guys are on.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, I'm Christine Young, Director of Audits for the LBA, and with me is Jay Henry, Performance Audit Supervisor. And I'll just go ahead and get started with an update of ongoing and pending audits. The first one on the list is the New Hampshire Commission for Human Rights. The commission received a draft copy of our report on April 9th. We met with the executive director in May to discuss the report and answer any questions. After that meeting, we received additional information from the commission, resulting in changes to the report. We made the changes, sent the report back to the commission in June. A July 15th deadline was set for the commission to send us auditee responses. And unfortunately, on that day, we were informed there was an emergency and the commission's executive director would not be returning to work until the end of August at the earliest. So the audit is currently on pause until we receive auditee responses from the commission. Moving on to special education. As you know, the audit scope is broad and the subject matter is complex. The audit is currently staffed with 5 auditors. We're more than halfway through field work. We're drafting observations for completed portions of our work. 5 observations have already been sent over to the department, and another set of observations is expected to be drafted by late September. The report will be lengthy with 50+ observations. And a full draft report is not expected until early 2025 at the earliest. Moving on to education freedom accounts. We've drafted the scope statement. You have that in your materials. Paige Lorenz, Performance Audit Manager, is available to present the scope right now for your consideration and approval if you would like that.
I think we would like that. Okay. It's always great to see Paige.
And we'll be looking for a vote on this.
Good morning. As Christine said, I'm Paige Lorenz, the Audit Manager. VLA Skids is still the auditor in charge. She just couldn't make it to the meeting today. So on pages 1 through 5, the scope statement is background information on the EFA program, starting from the legislative, the laws that put it into effect. We talk about the roster of students who are there, how the program was established, and what types of differentiated aid that the students may qualify for on page 2, and there's 4 categories of those. These are the same categories that public education students can receive. We discussed the EFA expenditures that are allowed under the program on pages 2 to 3, and this is the exact law that is copied and pasted in here. We go on to discuss the scholarship organization that it has contracted with to administer the program. The bullets below that paragraph discuss the payment system that they've established as the scholarship organization. On page 4, we discuss the phase-out grants. Those are entirely handled by the Department of Education, and the scholarship organization does not have any part in the phase-out grants. bottom of page 4, we discuss the department's program oversight of the Education Freedom Account program. We have background on the EFA administrator position in there. He's mainly responsible for the oversight of the program. The position wasn't immediately established when the EFA program went into effect, so there's a little bit of delay on the department's oversight of EFA. Below that, we discuss the audit scope. We lead in with the statutory language that requires the audit. And our scope question would be, how effectively did NHED oversee the EFA program during state fiscal years 2022 through 2024? We have a pretty detailed bulleted list of our objectives and some of the methods we'll be using to fulfill those objectives. Our audit period will be state fiscal years 2022 through 2024. However, we may have to look at a time period outside of the audit period in order to understand relevant matters within the audit period. So it's not completely limited to 2022 through 2024. As of today, we expect to have a final report to fiscal in the spring of 2025. We summarize the scope limitations at the bottom of page 6. The scope limitations have not changed since our March 18th LPAOC meeting. There is a part of that first paragraph is certain documents that we will not be able to we will not able to obtain that are in the possession of the scholarship organization. We have spoken to the department, and it will be up to their discretion to request documents from the scholarship organization. And the last paragraph is the department's position on the authority to audit the scholarship organization, which was also discussed at the March 18th meeting. And I can answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee. Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for bringing this to us today. So it doesn't seem like there has been any progress from, sort of our conversations from March 18th about, what was required in the law and, so the DOE's hesitancy to assist the LBA. Is that correct?
We are still working with them on the documents they'll be able to request on our behalf. It depends on what we're looking at. The details, as far as we can tell, the details of what we discussed at the March 18th meeting are largely unchanged. So anything that the department has done for its oversight, we won't be able to independently verify by going to the scholarship organization to obtain those similar materials or assess the potential risks that we would normally do in a regular audit. We can identify potential risks, but unless we go into the scholarship organization and obtain source paper documents, we won't be able to assess that full risk.
Follow-up?
Bob.
So considering what the requirement was in the law that required the audit, sort of the DOE's sort of unwillingness to, give access or even request access from the scholarship organization to that primary program data, do you feel like the LBA is sort of not able to comply with the law because of that limitation?
We're going to comply with the law in the extent that we can. Once we publish a report, we do put scope limitations in the report of the details of what stopped us from going through the full scope of what we usually audit in a program. So we will be able to fulfill the statutory requirement. I think we just won't get as far as we do in our normal audits.
Follow-up?
Follow.
So on page 6, when you're talking, and thank you for identifying these limitations, I think that's really helpful for us. On page 6, where you talk about the scope limitations, halfway through that paragraph, you say in the scope limitations, quote, preliminary discussions with NHD indicate most documents pertaining to the EFA program are solely in the possession of CSF, and then give some examples. And then lastly, that the Department of Education does not currently possess documents associated with initial EFA applications, documents used for determining eligibility for differentiated aid and annually verifying residency or specific items purchased by each student with the EFA funds. So can you expand on, I understand the department's position that the audit can only the auditors can only look at what the Department of Education has. It's clear what they have and what they do have and what they don't have. Can you expand on sort of your conversations about the Department of Education's willingness to, directly request what is necessary to complete the audit?
Sure. So what we'll do is we're developing our audit plan at this point, and we are going to go forward with our plan as if we did have full access to the documentation. And as we progress with that audit plan, we still do not know what exactly the department has versus what the scholarship organization has. So we will still request all the documentation we would need, and then we'll have to rely on the department to let us know what is unavailable and go forward from there.
Great. And last question. Has the Department of Education indicated whether they'd be willing to request that information that you're going to request?
It is going to be their discretion if it directly impacts their oversight responsibilities or something that we identify in laws, rules, or the contract that they should have. They have stated they're willing to reach out to the scholarship organization for those items.
Thank you.
Further questions? Yes.
you.
Representative Wallner.
So recently, there was a compliance report that came forth, and it was looking at a very small number of students in the program. I'm wondering, how will the LBA's auditors use that information in this audit?
Yeah, we just received that as well this past Friday, so we haven't gotten a chance to look over everything. We are reviewing it to determine what we can work off to independently verify information. Any work papers that the department used, that they've retained from that. They've been willing to share those with us, so we will get access to those. As far as our audit work, it will not directly impact what we have planned. Because it's the department's work and they had access directly, so we won't be able to independently verify what they did, but it is a good starting point in the types of issues that they identified.
Okay, one more question.
Follow.
So I guess I'm trying, do you anticipate having any interviews or conversations with the scholarship organization?
It is our understanding that we will not have access to the scholarship organization staff.
Thank you.
Further questions? Yes, Senator Lang.
Thank you. But to be clear, the Department of Education has said they'll cooperate as you're reviewing their oversight responsibility and how they've implemented oversight over the Child Scholarship Fund, and are willing to provide any documentation to show what policies, procedures, and rules they have that have been put into place, including documentation where they've executed oversight over that and validated that oversight.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have a question. So I think I heard you say you just won't have access to information to validate the department's responses. So I'm trying to think of the usual performance audits I look at, and there might be I remember one from lottery, for example, that said they weren't locking the drawing room door. It was some years ago. And so you would have had a way to validate whether they were or were not locking the room where they drew the tickets. But so you can look at their procedures and policies for oversight, but you won't be able to verify that they were getting the information to comply with those policies?
Correct. It appears that we won't be able to verify their practice conforms to their policies and procedures.
So we'll take their word for it.
We will report what the department reports, but that would be one of the areas where we noticed goal implementation that we were unable to independently verify.
So what kind of observations would you be able to report to the legislature?
I believe we'll be able, like I said, to go through the requirements in state law, and we will be able to identify areas of risk that the department should be looking at. We will not be able to assess the extent of that risk that exists. So we can point out areas that the department should be monitoring, but currently is not, or there are no controls, or we have concerns about. We will gather as much evidence as we can to support those. And just like I said, in a normal audit, we would be able to do some kind of sample at the source and put numbers in place of how big that risk is.
So if, just, I guess, one more question. The auditee gets to respond.
The auditee being the department, not the
yes.
staff. Yes,
Yeah, they will respond to the observations.
correct.
They have to respond?
I don't know anybody who has not provided responses. I believe they have to have an opportunity to respond. They do not have to put responses in the report.
So we don't know if they'll respond.
We've had a few audits with them so far, and they've never not responded. So I'd be surprised if they did.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Senator Whitley and then Hank.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for going through this with us again. It does feel like not much has changed since March, and at that meeting, a number of the members of this committee, all of whom are legislators, this is a bipartisan committee, expressed concerns that, our job as elected officials, as legislators, and more specifically, this committee's job is to make sure that public dollars are being used appropriately. And in this case, I just want to clarify, this is a situation where millions upon millions of public dollars are being put into a program operated by a private organization. And due to the Department of Education's unwillingness to allow the legislative, the LBA to go in and audit directly this organization that is utilizing and giving out public dollars. Do you have concerns that, we're being, our role as, the public puts trust in us to make sure that public dollars are being used appropriately? Do you have any concerns based on the way that this has proceeded that we're not going to be able to do that?
So far, we're working with the department and doing what we're statutorily required to do. I think after the report comes out, or if the Oversight Committee or the legislators see there are concerns that they may have, it's their authority to be able to put something in place for that. I believe we're
Would
just.
you speak into
Sorry,
the
I'm
page?
always afraid I'm too close to it.
I
I was just saying that after this, we will be able to fulfill the statutory obligations that are given to us, and we will provide a report. If there are remaining concerns when the report comes out, it pretty much is the legislator's authority to take extra steps to address those things. So from our end, there aren't any preliminary concerns, and we don't influence policy directly. So once you have the report, I think you'll have a better idea of those concerns.
Senator Lang and then Rep. Weber.
I just want to be careful in our portrayal of the Department of Education, right? I mean, I think the last sentence on page 7 really states what's going on in the ability of data, and no amount of laws that we pass can invalidate another law. So it's clear here. It says, in addition to the Department of Education, the Attorney General, the state's lawyers, represent his interpretation of the state standard contract, which is required to be used by all state agencies and contracting services, does not consider the data collected or generated by a contractor to be the property of the state. Doesn't give us the right to override that law if we pass another law, right? So we'd have to deal with how the state contracts are written to deal with contract law. But I want to be clear that if the Department of Education did oversight, you have a list of things on page 6, and one of which is identifying, recovering ineligible EFA disbursements paid to students, ensuring phase-out grants are paid to school districts appropriately, ensuring that students receive the correct amount. If the agency performed oversight activity and collected data to validate that they were doing what they were supposed to do, you'll have access to that data.
Correct.
So again, I want to be careful of not portraying Department of Education as not cooperating. They're cooperating within the terms of the law that they're allowed to cooperate, is even identified by the Attorney General. So, and I think you'll be able to do your report based on that. And if we need to adjust the contract to deal with our maybe bad language in our contract law, then we can deal with that.
Representative Weber and then Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask, how many people and how much effort are we putting in? In other words, how many people for how many weeks is this audit going to take? Or is it estimated to take?
Our current team is myself, Vile Skids, and one staff auditor, so 3 of us. Our anticipation is to get it to fiscal spring of 2025. We're finishing the audit plan within the next couple months. Once the audit plan is finished, we'll have a better idea of what to expect for a date for the report's release.
Representative Weber.
I think that my question was really somewhat on the same lines as Senator Lang's of just being sure that seems to me there are 2 issues here. One is tax dollars, but that's almost more of a financial audit than a performance audit. And that what you're going to be looking at, if I'm correct, is the actual oversight provided by the Department of Education and what procedures and practices they are using to comply with their statutory duty to oversee the program. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Wallner.
Thank you. The scholarship organization is a nonprofit organization. And is there a fiscal audit that's available because that organization as a nonprofit would have to be doing regular audits?
They do receive financial audits annually, and those are publicly posted and have been provided.
Okay. And those would be something that you would have access to and you would look at
Yes.
during this? Thank you.
Wait, but I have, okay. So, question, yes, Representative Earth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can you speak to the other special education audit that you're doing with the Department of Education and whether or not the auditors have been able to go to the local school districts, kind of analogous to the CSF Foundation, to determine whether in fact they are following the law that you are reporting on with regard to the Department of Education?
I can't speak to the special education audit. If you want to ask about local school districts, I believe Jay has a little more information on what was decided for going to the local schools for the special education audit.
Hello, my name is Jay Henry. I'm the Performance Audit Supervisor for the LBA Audit Division. With the special ed audit, the big special ed audit, which Christine has talked about, it's going to be big, 50 observations. It really, that is focused just on the department, and it is not going out to audit locals. I think we've talked about this before. It's looking at the program, we're sort of better to look at the state first because they're the ones setting up the program, running the program, and should be managing the program. And if we have issues with what the state is doing, you can imagine, what's happening at the locals, they're just reacting to what the state's doing. I think if the legislature wanted maybe after this audit to do more at the local level, that might be good. But I think have to be a lot of changes at the state level first.
Follow up?
Yes, Bob.
So despite the fact that the committee, when they originally requested that audit a couple of years ago, when I was initially on this committee, specifically requesting that the local districts be audited because they were the source of the problem that the parents were reporting, the Performance Audit Committee chose not to address that, correct?
Well, if I remember the scope statement itself that they agreed on, this committee, it was more focused at the state level.
Follow up? But I understand that.
Yeah.
But the initial request by the chairman at that time was broader than the scope statement that you put forward once that chairman was no longer the chairman.
If I remember that it sort of grew, that this whole topic. It started out, Senator Reagan was the chair of a special committee. He was also the chair of this committee. And it started off with the dispute resolution was the first thing that he wanted us to do. And we actually did that audit. Paige was in charge of that audit. But then as they kept talking about special education, it grew as far as the things they wanted us to look at. So that's how we came, and the locals were discussed, but I think it was determined, we really got to look at the state program itself first.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you. I figured I might as well chime in, everyone else said. So the issue here seems to be that this data, that some of the data is owned by an independent contractor and not by the state. Have you run into this issue previously in audits that you've tried to do? And if so, how have you worked through it?
That's more financial, some of the financial audits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall ever running into an issue of this magnitude. I mean, we do audit departments that have contracts with third parties. But in this situation, because the scholarship organization essentially runs most of the program, it is different. And, we have worked through minor scope limitations before, and we've always been able to come to an agreement and obtain the records that we need to obtain in order to perform the audit. This is a little different with the program being established in the chapter law and directing us to do an audit through the chapter law versus, this committee directing us to do an audit that is not established in the chapter law. So it is a little bit different.
Paula?
Yes, follow.
So is there a process where the contractor themselves can be audited? Who would have the authority to do that?
I mean, that would be an independent CPA firm or another audit firm. We historically have not audited entities that are not state agencies.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, but,
So-
except we do have, in our statute, there's a weird sort of provision about being able to look at non-state entities. I think that it's like up to five over a 5-year period, something like that. With the idea that I think they knew state funds are going down, to the local level. And we have looked at other programs like the CAP programs, money from the state will go to these the CAP programs to do various functions for the state or the federal government. Some of the federal funds go down, and we have been able to audit, those programs or receive information from those programs. But it also may be that their contracts that they have with the state are stronger or have language that allow the department to, the departments that have those contracts, access to data.
Okay, thank you.
So we've all seen the contract for this program, and it states pretty clearly that all the data belongs to the state. Did the Attorney General oppose the contract when it came before the Executive Council?
Not to my
Not
knowledge.
to our knowledge, no.
So they were okay with the fact that,
Well, I think they
as-
reviewed.
like in Medicaid, the state really owns all the data, even though most of Medicaid is managed by private entities. This is not a unique, the state owns the data contract.
Yeah, to me, it's an interpretation of the state contract and we had our initial view of it. We thought it would look, oh, boy, they can ask for all this data. If they ask for it, we can look at it, we can audit it. They saw it as, no, the program's set up to be away from the state. run by the scholarship program. And, there was sort of a separation there. And so, we're abiding by sort of their interpretation of how the contract and the law is. And I think you're still going to get a good audit out of it. It just won't be as thorough as we
robust.
normally would have. Yeah.
Senator Whitney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You indicated that, it's fairly unusual for this nonprofit private entity to, run a state-funded program so deeply. So the depth of how much, how little involvement the DOE has. So essentially, that means that the DOE has delegated, pretty much all of its authority to this nonprofit organization, and that to me has resulted in a, coupled with their, as you said, the DOE's interpretation of the contract, that has resulted in a very, very troubling lack of transparency for a significant amount of state dollars. Does the LBA, so my question is, does the LBA have the capacity, or would you need something additional from this committee regarding, sort of maybe the legislature's own interpretation of the contract and what, the DOE is obligated to request or not request? Because I guess, my understanding is that and I understand why you are relying on the Department of Education's interpretation, but that's the executive branch. We're the legislative branch, and so I'm wondering if there needs to be some additional review of this.
Yeah, I don't think that's the auditor's role. I mean, that's more of a legislative function. Again, if this committee wanted a different audit, we're doing a chapter law audit. This committee could come up with its own audit, its own scope. And if they wanted, I guess, to expand what we're doing. But you still may run into problems of interpretation. Yeah, it gets messy, and that's why we're sort of, we can do what we can do, but we can't push, sort of past that.
Well, to follow up on that, you've said this audit would be available in the spring.
If all goes well.
Budget season. So do you have any sense of whether it will be available during the House phase or the Senate phase, or not before the budget is completed?
I think we have to, once you decide what the scope of the audit is, so whether you approve it as written or if you change the scope, that would affect how long it takes. But once that's done, we write our audit plan, and that's really where we try to get a good estimate of when we think we're going to get this done if everything runs smoothly. So right now we're just sort of, we're estimating spring of 2025, and I don't, it's a broad time. I know that because we're not quite sure how long it's going to take. And it's also the interaction we have with the department once we give them observations. And right now we have no clue if it's going to be 1 or 20 observations. And the more observations, the more time it takes for us to write, the more time it takes for them to respond. It's like special ed. It's the reason why that one's
Right.
taking so long.
And that's big. You've told us that's going to be like this.
Yeah.
And also, we should note that spring in New Hampshire lasts for about 3 days. So, I mean, you're probably going to miss the spring window.
It should be mud season, right? That would be the,
Right, okay, mud season, Senator Lane.
I move we approve the scope, and I'd like to speak to my motion.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Weber.
So again, I think until we deal with the contract law conflict, I think this is the oversight, which is the great thing to look at, see, they have a the Department of Education has a responsibility to oversight. Are they performing their oversight? And if they have performed their oversight, did they perform it properly? I think is the appropriate thing to do, and I think it's a pretty clean vote.
Representative Weber, did you want to speak to your motion? Any other comments? Ready for a vote? The motion is to approve the scope statement on DOE's oversight of the EFA program. All in favor, say
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion is adopted unanimously, and thank you very much. Yeah. The next one, let me just announce now that I am not going to be voting on this next one. And I'll explain why once LBA talks about what the issue is.
Okay, so on to DHHS's out-of-state placements. This audit was to evaluate the interplay between the different agencies and bureaus within the Department of Health and Human Services in certifying out-of-state juvenile residential facilities. We scheduled an entrance conference for July 31st. Soon after that, during the planning for the audit, we came across a federal lawsuit against the governor and DHHS officials over the placement of foster care children in residential facilities. While it appears the lawsuit doesn't specifically relate to the 2 juveniles who were placed in Tennessee, there could be some overlap. A similar issue happened a few years ago with our performance audit of DHHS's Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services, and that audit is still pending now. Government auditing standards require us to evaluate the effects of legal proceedings on an audit. So after discussing the matter with DHHS, we and DHHS officials believe the audit could interfere with the lawsuit and vice versa. The lawsuit could interfere with the audit. Because of the lawsuit, we canceled the entrance conference, and we're suggesting that it might be best to suspend the audit of out-of-state placements until the legal proceedings have concluded. So we're looking for a vote on this now, unless the committee would first like to hear from somebody from the Department of Health and Human Services who could provide some more information on how the issue in the lawsuit could intersect with the audit.
Okay, and so the rest of my explanation is that I have a family member who's involved with the foster care lawsuit. So I will not be voting on this. Would the committee like to hear from DHHS?
Madam Chair, I guess I'm okay with the idea. This is a past practice of of us, obviously, so I don't know that we need to hear from anybody else. I think we continue the past practice.
Senator Whitney?
I would agree regarding the lawsuit, and also the governor just last Friday signed SB 417, which directly relates to the department's placement of children out of state and in state. So that law needs to be implemented too. So I would agree to the suspension.
So
Move to suspend.
is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Pearl. Any further discussion? And I will not be voting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And 1 abstention. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the doorway program. We've not started this audit yet, but we intend to start in the next month or so as soon as staff is available to begin that audit. And now we can move on to agenda item number 3, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Sure.
So there are 3 potential audit topics on the list, one of which is currently suspended, as I mentioned. That was for BEAS. Are there any other topics that you'd like to add to the list? If so, we'd be happy to discuss.
Any thoughts? Didn't we hear some suggestion about something out of environmental services that we decided not to go forward with? Do you remember that? Do you remember? You do?
Yeah. So again, I think this had to do with their appeals process is what we were talking about. And the idea of, again, but they're one of the few that actually have moved the appeals process outside their agencies to the Attorney General's office, where a lot of agencies do the appeals process within, like safety does their own appeals process within the
yeah.
Department of Safety. And so I think we decided that because that's already been kind of the model, I think maybe going forward, we want to look at, there was no need to do an audit of their appeals process.
Yes, Representative Weber.
The other one that we suspended last time, along with the one that was just described, was the public access to bodies of water. And we suspended both of those from consideration. They'd been sort of hanging out there for a while, and we simply decided to take them off.
So there are a couple other,
But that reflected in the minutes.
yeah, there's a couple of items on this list, DHHS Contract Bureau and BDS, including possibly reviewing system redesign and its effects on billing and services and or housing practices. Anybody have any thoughts, Senator Whit?
Yeah, on the latter, I think we're still awaiting a report. Is that correct on the system redesign on BDS?
I am not sure where that system redesign
Okay.
stands. They started it, they stopped it.
Okay.
I don't actually know where it is, but there was federal litigation
Right.
again. So maybe that's not a great topic, but how do we feel about contract management?
I'll just mention, I think contract management, Representative Weiler, it was one of his topics. And then at the next meeting, the department came in, department officials, and they had developed a contract management system. There was a handout and so, it was something that I don't think Representative Weiler knew about initially.
Okay.
I mean, it's something that can be audited, but I think I was surprised that they had actually come up with a system which would probably, we'll say auditors would like.
So we
Yeah, I
probably
mean,
don't need that one.
we don't need an audit right now, but we like to have some ready to go. I mean, as you can tell, we've got some audits that are ongoing. We're talking about the spring. In fact, that's probably the earliest that the next audit topic after we start the doorways audit. So we don't have to have one today, but we're always looking for something to put on the list so you guys can consider it. I think we're also coming up to the end of the session. There'll be a new committee in January. So whether you want to leave a clean slate or have some stuff sort of for us to do, before this committee, dissolves, I guess.
So are you going to have anything to bring us back before Organization Day?
I think the only one that might be would be the doorways scope statement. If we can
Okay.
get that done, I'll say December, but it all depends on when they start the work and how big the scope is and everything.
Representative Weber and then Senator Lane.
I think you've just answered most of my question, but given that the doorways is already in the pipeline, it would perhaps, I don't know if it's at all possible for that to happen before December 5th, when everything changes, or December, whatever it is this year.
It will start before, like we're planning on starting it
But
next month.
my point is that if we were to have a vote on a scope statement, it would be helpful to have it in November so we could vote on it end of November, which is always problematical anyway, because then we have organization day and reorganization, and you're going to have to wait for the appointees.
Yeah.
And that takes.
And that takes some
Some
time because, you know, leaders from both parties have to be elected and then, you know, it just,
Well, that may motivate us to
anything,
get it done.
that was my precise point. If there was any way of focusing on getting that done so that then you have that on your plate,
Ready to work on.
ready to work on. And then in January, you know, we will be reconstituted and ready to start work on whatever comes next. But it sounds to me like you have a fair amount on your plate anyway.
Yes, but we'll have some people freed up to start.
Right.
The doorway one. Yeah.
Okay.
Senator Lang.
That was a similar point I was saying, and we can use November to bring in topics at that point to kind of queue up for the next committee that comes on board. Here's the ideas, so. we
Here's
can
something
the
that they
November-
could think of or vote
Yeah,
on.
so we can, so they're not walking in blind. And so if we can, again, use November, like, to her point, to Representative point, to bring forward the doorways, vote on it, and maybe bring some ideas in for potential topics for number 3 there again, we can recommend for the next committee.
So I would like to suggest that we meet the first week in December because it's Organization Day week and everybody will be around. I mean, we had,
It have to be before organizational day. Some people won't be on, may or may not be on the committee anymore.
well, yes, but I mean, there's Monday and Tuesday.
I was going to say it has to be
Of
Monday or
that-
Tuesday because
Yeah,
we all become unpersons at midnight,
that's true.
just like Cinderella.
Right. We're going to leave our glass slippers behind, but we know that people who have been elected will be around that week. So in the meantime, think of anything that your constituents suggest or that you think needs a performance audit. And if there's no other business, we can adjourn the meeting. And it looks like it's 10 past 2. However, it's 10:48. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did first, and I